Welcome to the Essential HR Podcast. I'm your host, Brian Gorman. I'm here today with Kim Mock from Talent Evolutions. She's also the architect of the Emerging Leaders Program with the Renaissance Executive Forums. And I'm just excited to welcome Kim to the podcast today.
Thank you, Brian. I'm thrilled to be here.
Absolutely. And for our listeners, Kim, to get started, maybe talk a little bit about yourself, your background, and just kind of let everybody know who Kim Mock is.
Well, I'm a Purdue grad in personnel organizational psychology. And when I got out of school, I went into the field of HR immediately and was in that field for quite a long time. And locally here, I was an HR consultant with Crow. It was Horwath at the time for many years. And then I moved to First Source Bank and became the head of learning and talent development. Actually, when I was at Crow, I moved into sort of a training role, doing performance management and then helping with some succession planning. And then when I moved to First Source, definitely learning and development, AVP of learning and development, and I also help with succession planning there. And at some point, I decided I wanted to go out on my own, and I love growing and developing people. So that seemed like a natural evolution of talent or talent evolution.
That's awesome. Very cool. Thanks for that. And to get started, I think we wanted to talk today. You and I met yesterday a little bit and wanted to talk about emerging leaders in the program that you are part of, and really specifically how companies can recognize, coach, and develop talent. Maybe to start, let's talk about that a little bit. Like how can companies recognize talent? They if they try to develop people, recognize that, and maybe have a program to get that going in their organization.
One of the things that I think most managers need to be aware of is the generation that is coming through at this point doesn't just want development, they expect development. And in expecting development, they expect to be moved forward. That's different than generations that have been in the past. Not that we didn't hope for it, but we certainly didn't just expect it. We wanted to earn it and make sure that we had what we needed in order to move forward. So one of the things that I do with Renaissance particularly is I developed an emerging leaders program, and the individuals are identified, one through their performance evaluations through their employer, but then I also use two different assessments with them before they go into the program. And one of them is the caliber profile, which I've used for many, 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 many years in my career. And I like it so much because it specifically looks at fit to the job. And so it looks at the overall description of the job and then looks to see how well they fit that job, and it gives you a percentage. Now, keeping in mind, because they're emerging leaders, it's not going to be at 90%. I get that. But I need to see that somebody is at least close to 50 and having some of the basic skills that it needs to be become a manager for the first time. Or working with struggling managers who are, trying to develop additional skills.
So the target market is really towards maybe someone that's looking for it's in their first management role.
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Mm-hmm. It could be somebody who's sort of been a supervisor but wants to really go into a managerial role also. I mean, there's kind of an in-between there. It's also for people who are in that role and are struggling.
Okay.
The number one thing that keeps someone from being effective in a managerial role is they fail to let go of the work.
Guilty of that.
Many people are.
Absolutely.
Because that's what you're known for. That's what you got promoted for. That's what you're really good at, except now it's time to take that additional step. And so developing those interactive skills with your employees is critical.
What advice would you give to someone like that maybe is struggling with that? Like, they want to get into their management role. They want to succeed at that, but then they're just really struck. Cause I can identify with that. I mean, how would you recommend someone overcome that or learn to work within that piece?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Well, I think if you're an individual contributor, which is what we call those who are not yet managers, individual contributors can work their way to management in a number of ways. One, volunteering to be on committees or groups whether that's internal or external, and then taking a little bit of a leadership role, perhaps in a particular segment of something,
Mm,
and working your way through, what do I need to do? What's our goal? Who has what skills? That's a big piece, is understanding and choosing the right people that have the right skills to complete the task, and then working with them to complete the task, not completing it yourself. So again, we go back to that
mm,
failure to let go of the work. And what we find too often is you have the individual trying to become a manager doing the same stuff as the individuals who are the individual contributors, because that's what they're comfortable with. And sometimes they have to step back and let those people make mistakes, and then work with them to correct those mistakes, and then continue on learning other things that you need to learn. So it's an uncomfortable position for a good 6 months to a year for folks to make that transition.
mm. What have you seen, like organizations that are doing this well? What do they have in place maybe that is setting them apart from maybe companies that don't have something like this in place?
Well, I think they all have different approaches. What I see a lot, especially in my career working in this particular area, is I see people being sent out to disparate programs. So one person might go to the young professionals training that they
Right.
have. One might go to the University of Notre Dame for their leadership training. One might go to, another consultant who's using um, some type of a development for folks. And they're all different things.
Mm,
And so first thing we need to know is, what does the group need to know? What's a common thread? That's why I use the assessments ahead of time, because I can see, here are the weak areas for the group. Here are the areas that are in the middle, but that could be moved forward. Here's where they're absolutely kicking it. And I want to make sure I still pay attention to the parts where they're absolutely kicking it, because that's where they're going to feel really good about what they're
no, absolutely.
doing. So once we have those, then I can set the curriculum, and then I know when I'm doing my coaching with them every quarter, um, to what to focus on, and what can we measure, and how can we see the final outcome.
Fantastic. So I know we talked a little bit yesterday about the emotional intelligence piece of this too. What are your thoughts around that? I know you mentioned that in your background too, that you've done some work around emotional intelligence, and I'm speaking from the organization I work for. We're going through that as well. So what are your thoughts on that, and how does maybe the that piece of emotional intelligence fit into what you're doing now?
I think emotional intelligence has everything to do with being a good leader, even if you're not a formal leader, if you're a project leader or whatever that might be. But especially if you're going to be a leader of a team or a group and try to get good results. When I talk about emotional intelligence, I usually start out calling it effective communication. And then I work into the component of, you can't be an effective communicator if you don't understand how the person you're speaking to needs to be communicated with.
Mm,
So matter of fact, I just wrote an article probably 4 or 5 months ago for Gibson on emotional intelligence and effective communication. You need to understand your receiver. And so I use this head heart kind of analogy. And you'll find this is really funny. So I challenge you to do this. Look at couples that you know. They typically marry opposites. So I'm a heart person and my husband is a head person. That doesn't mean I don't use my head, and it doesn't mean he doesn't use his heart. But when it comes to solving problems or addressing a situation, I start with my heart.
mm,
How does that person feel? How can I increase their confidence? How can I help them, do something else? My husband, being a head person, is like, well, are we meeting the goal, and how do we get them to produce more, and how would he? And so somewhere in between is probably the best. And so what you need to know is, who am I speaking to?
mm-hmm,
So if you're speaking to me, and you know me well, then you need to appeal with, how is this going to make things better? How is this going to help people? How is this going to grow folks? If you're talking to my husband, it's, okay, how are we going to set the goal? How are we going to reach the goal? What are the specific steps that we're going to get there? That doesn't mean I don't end up doing that component, because I've been in performance management forever. I'm, a big goal setter and checking things. But then I need to make sure that I'm addressing both of those needs depending on who I'm speaking to.
mm.
Does that make
No,
sense?
that makes complete sense. I think that's
And
fantastic
with your
information.
spouse, it's 100% required.
No, it certainly is. No, I 100% agree
And
with you on
kids,
that, Kim.
and kids. Yep.
No, absolutely, absolutely. Um, so it could even be, I'm in the, as you know, in the world of sales too. I think that's critical to know your audience and your, I guess, your prospect even too, when you're trying to
That's
learn
right.
about their needs and requirements and goals and what they want.
Yes.
But each
Right.
organization is going to be different. Each company is going to be different. Everybody's gonna have their own style, and you have to learn to develop yourself to know and kind of clue into their methods of communicating.
And you know how you do that? You ask questions.
Yeah.
So often you'll find when you have somebody come in to sell you something, they don't really ask you questions. They're so busy telling you this is this and this is this and this is why it's great and this is this and this is like not, hey Mrs. Mock, how do you do your wash currently? What kind of machine do you use? What kind of soap do you use? Blah 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 blah. How many loads do you do? That kind of stuff. Then go into the areas that fit the areas that you want to talk further about the product.
Mm,
And then I start listening. But if you immediately start to sell, no. You want me to become the sell, right?
right.
Because you're saying so many cool things that suddenly I am leaning in. And it's the same way with growing and managing people. Ask their opinion, talk to them, ask them questions, make them think. It helps them process things so that next time you don't have to have this conversation because they've already thought it through. You toggled it a little bit and, kind of shorted it up a little bit, and now they know where to go. But I didn't have to tell them. They
Right.
figured it out.
Right. Oh, that's awesome stuff. That's fantastic. So we talked a little bit yesterday too about maybe companies that how can they avoid mistakes? Maybe what mistakes are they making in developing their leaders? And then what do they, maybe what strategies can they put in place to avoid making those mistakes and again grow their leaders to be more productive parts of the organization?
There are two mistakes that managers often make, again, when they pull off somebody. One, they pick the person who's the most efficient and effective person at getting whatever the task is, and they get it completed, okay? The second one is the like me syndrome. And the like me syndrome means, man, you do that just like I would do it. And man, you do this just like I would do it. And you've got to be good. So there's a problem with both of those. Some of those components are good, but they're not how you choose who comes to the next level. So for example, if I'm a numbers person, I don't necessarily want I don't want another numbers person coming along and trying to get through or work with people who actually need emotion. That's where emotional intelligence comes in. I understand that you need me to talk about how is this going to work out? How's it going to impact people? How's it going to impact you? How it will make people feel, versus someone else where I say, okay, so here's the target we're trying to hit. Here are the areas. What do you think we need to do? And so really getting down to having them help you solve the problem versus solving it for them. Does that make sense?
It does. It does.
Yep.
And I think we talked a little bit yesterday too about peer groups. I think this part's fascinating. I think how do peer groups, have you seen them work well? And maybe talk about what a peer group is. It has different meanings, right? But what how have you noticed them working well? What are they, and how would you recommend implementing one?
Well, in my work with Renaissance Executive Forums, the program is a 2-year program, and there are 10 classes per year, 4 hours each. And it's the same people in every class. And so they become very, very bonded during that period of time. They come from all kinds of different companies, from all different towns. And initially, they're all a little bit hanky about, talking about their issues and the things that they're perhaps not doing as well, or, they're not getting along with their boss, or whatever. We have them at Renaissance Executive Forums. They have to sign a commitment that they're going to come to class and do what they're supposed to. And 2, that they sign a confidentiality form saying that they will not talk about anything that's discussed. And if they do, they'll be removed. Okay, because that's how important it is. You need a safe place. And so we run the 4-hour sessions, and we have a training component We have exercises, and then we have what we call the roundtable. And what happens is people will come in and, or excuse me, they'll talk about what is an issue they're having specific to the topic that we're talking about today that the group can help them with. And sometimes everybody has one, and sometimes it's just a few people that have them. And so that person will say, here's my issue. And then the rest of the group's job is to go around the group one time and ask a question. They're not allowed to say anything else, just ask the question, the person responds. The reason they're not allowed to say anything else is because we're not in the problem solving mode right now, we're in the finding out mode, right? So that goes around twice, and people ask all the questions that they have. And then we go to, okay, so if I were you, this is what I would do. And then they go around the room and tell that individual, if I were you, based on what I've heard, based on the questions that you've answered, this is what I would do. And so each person answers that, and then the person gets to the end, the person that's asking, for the advice, by the end of the program has to tell us what are they planning to do, what was the solution that they thought would work the best, and they go back and implement it. And when we come back to the next class, the next month, they have to report out on what actually happened, what did they do, and what was the outcome. So it's not just a training class. These guys are together for 20 months.
Wow.
20 months, yes. And for 4 hours apiece. Now we do have some field trips in between there. We go visit, some of the other organizations so they can see when people are talking about it, what's going on, where they're actually working. But they really develop a bond, and that's something that can last off throughout the rest of your career, because they know it's a safe place. And for people who are new, who are emerging leaders, you don't want everybody else to think you're unintelligent or not informed or not a good manager. But when they get in there and realize they're all in the same spot, they're like, oh, great. I can be free with you guys. I can't do that at work.
Well, it's absolutely.
Yeah, confidentiality helps. That helps a lot.
And I wrote down what you were talking, psychological safety, that term there. And again, going back to the emotional intelligence piece, but being in that environment of that psychological safety where, you're in that group, you have the accountability part of that, right? But you also have the ability to share and not have any, a fear of judgment or being put on, well, not put on the spot, but just feeling like you're inferior to your other managers who, you're right, are going through the same things you are. And
then they feel normal.
Right.
And they feel like, oh, okay, well, it's okay that I don't like this. And they're not competing against one another, and they're not, they're not out trash talking to each other because they know that, they've told their secrets.
Right.
So,
no, absolutely.
But it really works well. And I have to tell you, when we finally get to graduation, it's such a celebration, but at the same time, it's so sad. So we try to keep them connected, and sometimes we'll have events and bring everybody back together, and just so they can see one another.
Oh, that's awesome. And I think we talked a little bit yesterday too about how these, you said classes are going on. So it's virtual now, right? Obviously.
Correct, just because of the virus, yes.
Sure. And then, so normally it's actual classrooms on site then, is that, or a mixture of both, or how does that work?
Normally it's in downtown South Bend. I think it's called the Layton Center. And it's in the Renaissance Executive Forum's offices. And when we do go back, we will have the tables all separated. People will wear masks. We would have plenty of distancing in between. We probably won't serve food until we get the all clear. But we're getting close to that. We're getting close to be able to do that. I know I love to see people face to face. I'm not. I love that we can stay on and keep going, but I would rather see people face to face.
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely.
Like I said, I was an HR person, so
yeah.
People are my thing. I love people.
No, absolutely.
But I also do coaching with each of these individuals, and so I coach not only with them once a quarter, but I also coach with their manager. And I think that's important, and it gets missed a lot in programs because the manager's view and the individual's view are not always the same. And so I need to see, is the manager actually meeting with the individual regularly? And if not, why not? And then maybe give some coaching to them. I also need to see if the individual that's in the class is actually coming to them with problems, issues, questions, and are they helping solve them? Because sometimes you have managers that don't meet regularly with their people, and they should. They should, even if it's for 20 minutes every Monday. Just to touch base, here's where we are, here's what we're doing, here's what I need you to do. or at least, once a quarter to say, this is where our target was. This is what we had on your review that you were going to do. Tell me what you've done. Okay, that's really great. Or, well, we need to adjust this and move this forward, so that everybody has a great opportunity to make sure that they're doing the best job they can.
Oh, there's so much there. That's fantastic. Now, as far as when you talk about um, it, meeting together with your manager and the employee, is it something you would separately?
Separately, yes.
Okay. So apart from like their one-on-one,
Yes.
or just a different time frame. Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
Definitely not in the same room, no.
Okay, sure. So you found though that companies that do this
Yes.
are the ones that are successful, and the ones
Yes.
that are implementing
Yes.
this type of a program and succeeding
Right.
at it.
The differences I've seen I've had situations where an individual worked in sort of a warehouse area, and because she was the best person at doing that, became promoted, but kind of continued to do what she did before because that's what made her successful.
Mm-hmm.
So they put her in the program, and one of the number one things we say is let go of the work. Let go, let go, let go. Figure out what your boss wants you to do that, and let go of the work and find somebody good to do it. And she finally did it. She finally let go. She's starting to lead. She's now been put on a task force. They put somebody else in her original position and moved her up, and things are flowing really well. I've had others that have been promoted. I've had others who are like, oh my gosh, this is like a whole new world, and my boss is talking to me, and I really feel like I'm engaged. And so you can retain people that way as well.
That's a great point. I was just going to ask you. So as far as retention is important, what other things can happen out of this? I mean, obviously promotions and retention, but how else can companies benefit? Those are huge areas, but what are your thoughts around that?
Well, they become seen as the employer of choice. Not only are people rocking and rolling and being promoted and move forward and things like that, but they're being invested in. There are some companies that rely almost completely on online learning. That does not replace face-to-face. Geez, I really need to tell you about the situation I had, and I need your thoughts and your input. And being able to do that outside of your work, whether it's with your peer group, whether it's with me as your coach, gives them that safe space to find out information, and then I can work with them. I have one little gal who just has the hardest time going back and asking what she wants, or to get more clarity on her role. And I'm working very hard with her to find her voice and go say, not can I do this? It's here's the project you gave me. Here's what I plan to do. Are there any adjustments that you think would be helpful? And so that whole line of being able to question and ask questions, not make statements, not leading questions, but even if it's your employee, getting more information out of them, or if it's your boss, getting more information out of them, and then coming to your conclusion.
Yeah, such good stuff. So what do you think companies that maybe aren't doing this well, what can that lead to for them? Can that lead to problems in the organization? And just what have you seen? I mean, I was going to have you maybe share a couple of success stories, but I know we talked a lot about how do you implement this, how this works extremely well, but maybe talk about a company that that might be a little bit disorganized, right, with this, and
Yes.
has a hard time managing it. What are your thoughts around that? Because it's critical information and critical points here.
I think the number one thing that I hear for people who are really struggling is that my boss doesn't talk to me. I don't have regular meetings with them, and I don't know what my goals are. That's your job as a manager. That's
Right.
your number one job as a boss or a leader of a department, is to make sure everybody knows where they're going and why they're going there and how they're going to get there, and what is the part I play in that bigger organization, and how do I impact people, and who do I go to when I have a question or problem, and how do I get things moved forward. But sometimes the manager is somebody who was an individual contributor that got put into a role that isn't necessarily their forte either. And so that's why I coach with both, because your employee doesn't know what to do differently unless you work through that with them. And you've got to teach them how to think, which is why questions instead of discussions, but I've seen some just amazing transitions in some of the folks that have come through my emerging leaders programs. I mean, just like night and day. and their their bosses have been just absolutely thrilled with the results. There are some who don't put in as much work, but for the most part, I would say 95% probably come out and go, wow, that was amazing. And then they tell their friends, and then their friends tell HR, I want to go do that.
No, absolutely. You got me excited about it for sure. So maybe to wrap up, how do people that want to learn about what you do, Kim, and in your programs, how do they get in touch with you?
You can reach me at kmock, that's the letter K, mock at executiveforums.com. And I am happy to provide, I have a nice brochure that lays out the entire program and how it works. You can certainly call me. Send me an email first and let me know you're going to call me, because I get a lot of junk phone calls. I only have a cell phone. I don't have a home phone. Sure. And I'm more than happy to talk with you about it and send you a flyer. And I do post quite often about it in the LinkedIn, in my LinkedIn page. So please, Kimberly Mock on LinkedIn, you can find me there. And I'm willing to help and talk to anybody, because I think it's just an absolutely fantastic program. In my company, Talent Evolutions, I do teach side programs as well. I had going back to emotional intelligence, I had a class that I needed to teach to one of my students asked me to come teach emotional intelligence to his engineers. So think about that for a minute. Yeah. So I said, I will, but I'm not calling it emotional intelligence.
Right.
Because the number one issue they were having was communicating effectively with other people. So that's what I called it. And I'm telling you, they absolutely loved it. I did 2 different groups of people. I think I taught about 40 of them, 30 or 40 of them. And it went really, really well and has helped communication significantly. So I was pretty excited about that. I like to make my training fun.
Absolutely. Well, absolutely. No, well, hey, Kim, thank you tremendously for taking the time today. I was super excited about talking with you. I know we've known each other for a long time, but certainly,
Yes.
again, thank you for being on the podcast, and I highly recommend the work you do, and top notch, and certainly appreciate our friendship too. And looking forward to having you on again.
Great. Good
All
to
right.
see you.
Thanks, Kim.
Bye-bye.